Hi, I'm Liz Scarf. Welcome to this channel, an exploration of collaborative learning for cultural repair. And this video is part 2 in what I think is going to be a 5-part series about inner criticism. And in this particular video, we're going to explore some ideas about the function of critics and why we might not want to get rid of them or banish them from our psyche. And honestly, we probably can't anyway. So, yes. So the patterns and intent and dialogues and mood states of our inner critics, and if you haven't watched the first video about how inner criticism kind of manifests how we experience it, I think that's worth checking out. But anyway, the ways in which inner critics happen to us and express in the things they say or the moods we feel, all these are generally created by or in our early upbringing experiences. So how we were parented or not parented, and of course knowing that parenting is an expression of culture as well, right? So the kinds of messages, both explicit and implicit, that we received about who we are, what the world is like, and what we have to do or not do to be loved, accepted, successful, safe or safer, etc. All these things create or construct the kind of inner critics or the kind of messages that they communicate to us, right? So depending on the kind of upbringing we've had, these can be very harsh, determined critics, or at the other end of the spectrum, very loving, supportive, teacher guide types, which we really wouldn't call critics because they don't say critical things. They just say encouraging, teaching, learning-oriented things. So I haven't actually met many people who got this from their childhood, but I'm sure they theoretically exist. But probably as a therapist, you don't see them very often, right? Because they're just having a pretty good life. And if you're not gifted with an inner world like this, you can earn it to some degree through things like a bucket load of therapy. And I'm actually not sure what else. I actually think like things like self-compassion meditations, the work of Kirsten Neff, that's all really cool work. I'm not sure if it's enough to totally shift this, but I think it would make some really big differences. And there must be lots of other ways too, which you could share in the comments if you've had some good experiences elsewhere. For me personally, I've just done that a lot in therapy. Anyway, back on track. Assuming we're talking about critics that are somewhere in the mid-range of this spectrum of harshness and just not even critical, and I will talk about super harsh critics in another video. But let's say we're talking sort of in the mid-range. In our early life, critics try to direct our behaviour in purposeful ways, primarily to maintain connection with caregivers, even if those caregivers are unsafe caregivers. Right? So critics aren't random and they're not trying to harm us. They're acting in purposeful ways to try to maintain connection with caregivers because that's kind of protective and safe, even if they're not safe caregivers. Unsafe caregivers are still the only place kids can get safety from generally, or some kind of connection which they need. So, but more, there's so much in this, I just keep going, this and that. Anyway, inner critics are super helpful and protective at this stage in our lives. They're keeping us alive, connected and developing. They are an adaptive strategy in a situation where maybe we don't have any other options. Because being a kid is a low-rank state, right? You just don't have a lot of power in the world as a child. And so we have to adapt to and respond to our caregivers and do what we think they want us to do to stay connected and loved. But this does create a pattern that becomes a bit or a lot less useful as adults, presumably with more power in the world and options for survival and connection, right? So as adults, maybe hopefully we're earning our own income, we're buying our own food, our own shelter, we're making our own friends. We're not dependent on our parents or early caregivers for any of this stuff anymore. And, well, not for everyone, of course, obviously, but the majority of people are not dependent on that anymore. So, but we still have critics that are acting like we are, acting like we don't have that much power. So understanding that critics as a role in our psyche, they work hard, and they're mostly working with good intent. It's important to kind of appreciate this for how we're going to work with them. Doesn't mean that they're not jerks who need to learn some manners and how to be respectful and actually how to be effective, because they're not actually very effective over a long, once we're adults so much. But we'll get to that in the next video. Sorry, I can't do it all in one. So anyway, these mid-range critics, I think of them as coming in two main varieties. One that is championing a strategy of safety, and the other that is championing a strategy of achievement, right? So strategy and achievement. And they're both strategies driven by, well, I think, right, it could be lots of theories about this, deep drives of connection and belonging, right? We're an interdependent species. Our best survival strategy is connection and belonging. And so we will have strong inner drives in our psyche to optimize this. So the first critic, the one that champions safety, kind of plays a message of like, play it safe, stay small, don't take risks, conform, go along with everyone else, don't make a fuss, don't be different, don't make waves, don't be weird, don't stand out, don't change, right? And so when we're at edges to growth or change, this critic says, no, don't do it, it's not safe, and it will catastrophize the growth direction, right? So an example might be helpful. Let's say we've never really engaged in creative or artistic pursuits, right? But we've actually had a long-held secret desire to paint. When we think about taking action, right, this stay small critic will say things like, you're not creative, you won't be any good, people won't like your work, it's expensive, you can't afford it, it's really selfish, you're too old, you can't make a living out of art, you'll end up poor. Like all these things that are like a really, really long way away from just like picking up some paints and the paintbrush, right? And so the catastrophizing happens, the criticism, all these things to kind of say, don't take the risk, right? And as if there's some massive risk involved in trying a bit of painting. Even this thing that people won't like your work. It's assuming you're going to show anyone, right? So there's a whole range of things that don't really quite add up. But it's all about like, don't change, because change seems risky and could be scary, and you could get disapproved, and you try to maintain whatever connections you currently have. So now the other mid-range critic pattern that I'm talking about around the one championing achievement. Now this can be operating from a place of driving success in order to please early caregivers, right? Like trying to get good school reports because you get rewarded, or da-da-da. Or it could actually be in contact with our sort of deep, deep dreams about what we're called to do in the world. And we'd each need to kind of discern, whose ambition actually is sort of rooted in my critics. Am I actually kind of pushing for my own dreams, or am I pushing to please somebody else so that they'll, reward me? Maybe it's a bit of both sometimes. Anyway, either way, this critic, in an effort to motivate change and action, says things like, or communicates things like, why haven't you done it yet? Everyone else has done it. You're just lazy. You're too slow. You're not taking it seriously enough. You need to make a plan. You need to be more disciplined. Like, it's this kind of really like, it's a pretty unpleasant kind of coach type figure, right? And this critic suffers from a lack of sensitivity about the complexities of being human, about differences in privilege, whether they're like material privileges or psychological privileges, and also a lack of understanding about how change actually happens in humans. So sometimes, so I've heard, this critic then pushes us into big action plans where we come up with a big overhaul of our life, a bunch of things we're going to do differently all at once. And basically this sets us up for failure, right? Because this critic is delusional about the realities of being human, and that we rarely change habits that quickly or that many at once. It's just, you go look at all the habit research, it's just not how we work. We are more of a one step at a time kind of creature, and also critical motivation just doesn't work long term for us. And it also doesn't work for big goals, because we can't sustain, we can't actually change under criticism over an extended period of time. Because change motivated by criticism doesn't usually stick. We could do it maybe for a short period of time and then we fall back, right? And it demotivates us over the long term, because we keep failing, because we keep getting set up to fail. And then we kept having critics kind of saying, oh, you're a failure. And so over time, we just learn not to bother. But also when we do succeed, we don't get any inner acknowledgement too, right? The critics just kind of ignore it and set the next goal. They don't even notice how you achieved that thing, you know, that we were so mad about you achieving. There's no recognition. And so there ends up being no reward internally, only punishment, even for achieving. So we don't even go there. So at edges to change and growth, this critic says, oh my God, do it already and do it all at once. Now, if we came back to our example of wanting to start painting, right, this critic might say, I can't believe you're taking so long to start. No one else faffs around like this. You need to take this seriously. Now go sign up for a fine arts course at university right now, as well as get all the books, the paints, the paper, the brushes, join some Facebook groups and rearrange your home to make a studio space. Oh, and get a beret. You know, those little French painter hats, right? So it's like, it's a lot, right? And you just really wanted to like paint. But because painting represents a change in your identity, both these critic roles get really activated, and they kind of get into this yes-no dynamic, right? Now, obviously I'm using a light example and making it a bit fun for the video to make it a bit safer to watch, right? But the inner experience of these critics is rarely fun. And there aren't really any light examples because this is our life we're talking about, and it actually really matters. There's nothing kind of light about this. But the way I'm describing it, I know it also makes it sound like inner criticism is just our personal psychology, and it's so not. We experience it though as if it is, and so we do need to work with it like that. But not only. And we also have to remember that the nature of the messages of our critics, the what and how we are criticised, are culturally constructed, and therefore they reflect systemic patterns of oppression as well. So inner critics are complicit, or they're a tool or a device, right, in internalised oppression. So that's what I wanted to say about these two kinds of inner critics. And I think there's another kind, which is this really harsh one, which I'll talk about another video. I think next week we'll explore ideas about what to do with inner critics like this. Like, what can you do in your own inner world to respond in different ways? So that'll be next week, week 3. Okay, thanks for watching, folks. Bye.